This week on the podcast, a special gift for the nonprofit geeks out there. I include myself as one of them. Fiscal sponsorships. You've been craving it. You've been messaging for it. Fiscal sponsorships for nonprofits is, I think, one of the coolest hacks for getting 0 to 60 as fast as possible. And I found Andrew Schulman, the principal of Schulman Consulting, who he lives, he breathes, as far as I can tell, fiscal sponsorships. Andrew, thank you for coming on and helping us go through what we should know about this. How's it going, Andrew?
Thank you, George. It's going great. Going great. Thanks for having me.
Well, you've been at it since 2015, and I feel like you earned the badge of having survived the nonprofit, among other things, apocalypse of very difficult times where, unfortunately, there was a culling, I think, of a lot of nonprofits, a lot of organizations as we moved through the pandemic. Now, we were talking a little bit before we pressed record, where like business is starting to pick up a little bit more. So maybe you can tell us about what it is Schulman Consulting, and I'll say schulmanconsulting.com if you want to find Andrew's company. What is the focus, expertise of what you do?
So we are exclusively focused on the world of fiscal sponsorship. And what that means is my team and I spend about half our time working with organizations that provide fiscal sponsorship. So those that either have been doing it for a long time and want to make a change or want to assess how they're doing, or those who are just starting out and wanting to think about fiscal sponsorship and launch a new program. We've worked with organizations that have been shutting down fiscal sponsorship programs. So we spend about half our time with that group, and then about half our time working with fiscally sponsored projects and those that are interested in becoming fiscally sponsored projects. So we work at three points in the life cycle, as I like to say. One is at the beginning, where if you're starting something new and you're thinking about fiscal sponsorship, you find us, we can help you find the right fit for a fiscal sponsor. Sometimes there are folks who are started, and we'll talk about this probably a little bit later, folks who start at fiscal sponsorship, fiscal sponsors that are sort of ad hoc situations where the organization isn't necessarily a professional fiscal sponsor. It's what they do on the side. Maybe they're just doing it to help out a friend or something like that. And sometimes those entities grow bigger than their current fiscal sponsor can support, but not big enough that they've sort of outgrown fiscal sponsorship. So there's actually a transfer situation that can happen where you go from one fiscal sponsor to another. And then for those that reach the point where they're, have their everything sort of in a row, are sustainable, have enough funding, thinking about going out on their own, we do have a suite of services to help them sort of through that decision-making process, and then also like walk with them through that whole process.
I had not even thought about how many elements there are to this. Of course, where you have a nonprofit that is doing it for a friend and do it on the side, or they're grant making and they're like, oh, wait a minute, these organizations or these projects, these community-led groups don't have a fiscal sponsorship. And just to lay the groundwork, let's define, because like we're now 3 minutes and 40 seconds into this, what is a fiscal sponsorship?
Yeah, it's a great question, because if you've never heard of it before, it sounds like, I have a friend who likes to say, it sounds like something it's not, and what it is, it doesn't sound like, it doesn't give you any sense of. So
sounds like I get money.
Exactly.
Do I get?
No, and you don't get money, right? So that's a big disappointing thing for most people. So fiscal sponsorship it's essentially a contractual agreement between two parties, one of which is often a 501c3, but could also be a different kind of nonprofit, like a C4 or even a C6. And another group that does not have its nonprofit status from the IRS, either does not have it yet or just doesn't have it and isn't planning to get it. And through that relationship and the way it's set up, there's the smaller group, or the newer group or smaller group, can actually fundraise for charitable work that furthers the mission of the larger group in a way that they can accept tax-deductible dollars, essentially because of their relationship with that larger group, right? So you could start, the sort of prototypical situation is, you're going to go start some new nonprofit, right? And I've heard you talk about this too, so I know you're well familiar with it. You can go the sort of traditional 501c3 route, right? You can go, get your state corporation, get your EIN, go to the IRS, do all that stuff, right? But I always tell people no one starts a nonprofit because they want to run a small business. But that's essentially what you're going to have to do, except, you and I run businesses, but nonprofits have more red tape, more oversight that they need to deal with than even you and I have with our companies. So most people don't realize that going in. So in fiscal sponsorship, and there's a few different versions of fiscal sponsorship, and we can, depending on how far you want to geek out, we could talk about different models and things like that. But in the version that I'm talking about right now, what if you could start your nonprofit and you could focus on just the programmatic work and the fundraising, and you could hand off everything else to somebody that already does it for their job, that knows what they're doing. So everything from finance and accounting and HR and legal and insurance and IRS filings and other compliance and audits, all that stuff can be done by somebody else. And all you have to do is pay them usually a small percentage of the money that you raise in exchange for those services.
What are the industry standard, I know, dangerous word, industry standard for the fees that a fiscal sponsor, meaning so we have a 501c3 organization, just to keep it simple, that then lets you leverage their C3 to get donations. Somebody comes in, they donate $100. What percent of that does your group end up seeing if you have a fiscal sponsor in play?
Yeah, so I have to give 1,000 caveats here, but what we're talking about now is often called Model A fiscal sponsorship or comprehensive fiscal sponsorship, which is sort of the one I just described, where you're handing everything off to the fiscal sponsor who does all that work, all that back office work for you. In sort of the middle range of those fees, and I will say those fees range from 0 to, I've heard, as high as 50 and 60% of every dollar.
Oh my.
Which is way beyond what anyone should be paying. So if you're paying that right now, you need to come talk to me.
Don't do that.
We'll find you.
If you're listening to this and you're paying 50, don't do it. Find Andrew immediately. And this was worth the podcast. Stop listening and go find him. I agree with that.
The sort of middle range of the bell curve is probably in the 8 to 12% range of usually based on revenues, occasionally based on expenses. So sometimes it's when the money comes in and sometimes it's when the money goes out. But it's one or the other.
Oh, interesting. On the money, I understood that type of, as you said, Model A leveraging the 501c3 sponsor, that it was of donations money in, but you're telling me that there's money out, so that, let's just keep it simple for math, because public math is difficult. 10% is my fiscal sponsorship percentage agreement on funds in, meaning somebody my mom donates $100. I see $90 of that, and correct, 10% of whatever's donated is in. But now you're also saying that there's some times where outbound I have to pay percent as well.
No, it's one or the other. So some sponsors have it set up where it's 10% on the money that comes in, and some sponsors have it where it's some percent on the money goes out. Mm-hmm. So it could be like a right off the top when it comes in, or it could be sort of like a tax on money that goes out. It's much more common to have them on the money coming in, but there is some cases where sponsors use the other version. But it's one or the other, not both.
Yeah, I think that I wasn't aware of that. I just learned something. There you go. I am curious. It seems like there's a way for any nonprofit that has an established 501c3. Is this like a clever way of maybe making money because you're providing services you already do and already provide by providing fiscal sponsorships? Is this like a thing?
So I hear this a lot from people that I talk to that are, exactly that. Oh, this is a earned revenue stream. We're diversifying our revenue.
Go get it.
Right? Technically, it could be. I will tell you that most organizations that do fiscal sponsorship as sort of a side gig or as one program among several or many often lose money on the work rather than make money on the work, because it sounds like it's simple and it's just plug this into what you're already doing, but it's never that simple. and I've worked with enough clients to see again and again that, it's more work for your systems, it's more work for your people. And often the biggest issue is sort of burnout of people, because if you have one or two fiscally sponsored projects and it's sort of a side thing, it's probably not officially part of anyone's job. And so it's just like extra work that is put on top of someone else's job, and they probably already have too much work as it is. And so I try to counsel people that you shouldn't do it if the goal is to make money, because you have to get pretty good at it before you're able to do that.
Yeah, that's really interesting, where you kind of get halfway there, but it's at the inefficient side where, people are donating, you're making like $1,000 a year and paying easily $100,000 in staff time because you
Right.
need all this machinery in place, applications back and forth, customer service. Like, you're like, oh my gosh, that's just for these two things. And then like the unsatisfied donor, the confused donor, like what I
Right.
could see that being that type of fool's gold. But I want to come back around to strategic mission solutions, saying,
Sure.
hey, we have maybe a underserved, unbanked local group organizing without the infrastructure. What situations, if I'm a nonprofit listening right now, what situations does it make sense for a nonprofit to offer the service of fiscal sponsorship?
Yeah. The biggest number one piece is mission alignment, right? So you want to really make sure that this is furthering the mission of your organization. And so there's actually, if you're doing stuff that's not furthering the mission of your organization and you're taking on projects that are sort of in a different field, any revenue you make from fiscal sponsorship can actually be classified as unrelated business income, and you can get taxed on it. And so it sort of opens up a whole other can of worms. Think about mission alignment. So assuming there's mission alignment, then I would look at, okay, how is your infrastructure, right, as the organization that will be providing fiscal sponsorship? Would you give yourself a passing grade in terms of your finance and accounting, your HR, your legal? How much do you know about your insurance? All of those things. And then how much are you able to dedicate someone to, manage this program, right? Because this is essentially an internal program that you're creating that will oversee or manage other programs, right? The fiscally sponsored projects. And so you really need to be able to dedicate that and, make sure you have all of that before you get started from a sort of infrastructure piece. You're also going to want to make sure your board of directors is on board and understand that any liability that is coming on because of these sponsored projects is on your larger 501c3 and is technically on them. They have that legal and fiduciary responsibility. So that's a big piece. And then I would say, before you get started, you would want a really good fiscal sponsor agreement, which is that contract that we talked about. This is a contractual relationship. So it's really important to have a really good fiscal sponsor agreement that has a bunch of different things, but the most important thing in there is the termination provision, right? So that sets up the ability for either party to walk away when they are so inclined, and sort of how that will happen. And I'm not an attorney, I'm not an accountant. This isn't legal advice or financial advice in any way, but that piece is really important, because that sort of describes how this will end whenever that time comes, and more than likely it will come in one shape or form. But so those are sort of some of the key things to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not something you just want to wander into, because of, at the very least, the liability is like something to make you take a pause on. So we're really warning you off for, as a nonprofit, running around and saying, you get a C3, you get a C3. So like a little pause on that. I want to flip it over though to young entrepreneurs or people entering the social impact sector saying, hey, I'm sitting on the fence of creating we'll stay with the 501c3, creating a new 501c3,
Mm-hmm.
and then going after my mission to community garden poetry center, support for a disease, whatever it may be, versus a fiscal sponsor. So I'm sitting on the fence. When you're advising somebody trying to decide, should I create a 501c3 or create and work through a fiscal sponsor, how do you help them decide, and what are those factors?
Yeah, so it tends to be a little bit different for everybody, but if we try to generalize a bit, right? I think if you're thinking this venture, this social venture is going to be really small, so that you could get your 501c3 with the 1023 EZ form, which I know a lot of people have issue with, and I'm usually one of them. But if you're starting something really small, there's not going to be any employees. It's going to be volunteer, managed and led. You could probably do without a fiscal sponsor and get your own C3 just because it's so small. On the other hand, if you've never done it before, if you've never managed a nonprofit, if you don't really have that experience, and this is your first sort of entree into this world, I always say it's better to start with a fiscal sponsor because they know everything. I mean, they don't know everything, but they know how to find everything and how to do what you need to do. And they've done it before. And so, fiscal sponsorship, as you could tell, like, this is what I do day in and day out. I could talk about it for every day for the rest of my life and never get tired of it. It's not the right thing for everybody all the time. And so I think it's important to think about that. But, if you're thinking about making something that, hey, one day I'm going to be an employee, or we're going to raise over $50,000, or, even if it's not going to happen right away, I'd say go start with a fiscal sponsor and go that route, because it's just going to make your life so much easier.
One of the things I'd say I have a bias toward starting with a fiscal sponsor is it lets you market test your idea much faster than going through the extreme headache and annoyances of the bureaucratic industry of creating a proper C3 with the IRS. We have lots of content on that, the document after document, and don't even get me started on the solicitation rules of state by state, depending on how you're fundraising. It is hilarious. I also point to things like we have got 1.8 million nonprofits in the US, in the 501c3 world, and literally 3/4 of them operate under $1 million. And, a good number are defunct. I was trying to find stats on it, but I'm curious, that's the big picture of C3s in the marketplace. How many fiscal sponsorships are active? Is that even the right measure? Like, what's the number?
Yeah. And so there unfortunately there isn't a number, because the crazy thing about fiscal sponsorship is that you don't have to, as an organization that's going to offer fiscal sponsorship, you don't have to check a box on your 990. You don't have to send a letter. You don't have to pass a test. You don't have to do anything. You literally could do it without an agreement and just shake someone's hand, which for someone like me is like the scariest thing imaginable. That there are nonprofits out there just becoming fiscal sponsors, like at the drop of a hat. But I will say there's, based on sort of what we know, which is mostly based from something called the Fiscal Sponsor Directory, which is a great resource if you're looking for a fiscal sponsor. It's just Fiscal Sponsor Directory, all one word, .org. And I think they have between 400 and 500 organizations that have self-identified as fiscal sponsors or providing fiscal sponsorship, which is relatively small, obviously. There's probably, I would say, this is my own personal estimate, at least 10 times that of organizations that are doing it on the side or as sort of a off and on thing when necessary, who don't have like a formal plan, a formal fiscal sponsorship program, but are doing it now and then. And so, if you want to know the number of projects under fiscal sponsorship, it's probably, I'd say it's probably close to, I don't know, 45, 50,000. And those are not showing up in that 1.8 million number.
Of course, because they're essentially programs
Right.
underneath the nonprofit.
Exactly.
And sometimes a program is a program, and sometimes it's a separate entity and organization that leverages that C3, and it is hard to quantify. That is so interesting. I was just looking at the fiscal sponsor directory.org, and it's a list.
It is.
It is a bare minimum meets database, but
well,
it's kind of interesting.
Every organization has its own page. And so I will say it's managed by a fiscal sponsor in San Francisco called the San Francisco Study Center, and they do it totally as a labor of love. They don't get paid separately for it. They try to raise some money for it, but there's no charge to be in it. There's no charge to use it. So it's definitely, could be better, especially if someone like you who's looking at it from more of a tech vantage point. But we work with what we got.
Not miles of heart running this thing, but it's helpful, right? Because it's showing us some of the rates and costs and saying like, all right, are you in this type of mission related piece or not? Right. I want to point out some of the cons of, because we've been very bullish of fiscal sponsorships, and again, very pro. You should go for it. If you're not sure, flipping a coin. Some of the cons, though, that I'll point out is that you can't leverage that fiscal sponsorship for things like the Google ad grant. So in your mind, like, oh, I'm a nonprofit, I can go get this discount over here. I can leverage my C3 number to go get access to, again, grants like that. You can't. The Google for Nonprofits, it gets a little questionable, or Microsoft's nonprofit program. All of those things where you're like, oh, I get this discount for being a nonprofit. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. What are some of the other outstanding things for you in terms of like, that's a con you should be careful about with fiscal sponsorships?
Yeah, I will say before I get to that, the Google stuff specifically, I've worked with fiscal sponsors on how to create multi-tenancy within those things.
Okay.
So it's not the way Google necessarily intended, but it's within the terms of service, and there are ways to do it with both the ad grant, and
you can get a separate domain inside of there where you've got multiple domains running around.
Exactly.
But not the Google ad grant. I know this firsthand. You cannot get multiple ad grants with the same C3. You can
need
fork
to
the grant, but I have not.
You need to split up that one grant among multiple projects.
Exactly. But that would be through one admin interface. And
Correct. It's not ideal, for sure.
Messy.
It's not ideal. I think the world doesn't totally accept fiscal sponsorship in certain corners. So there are funders, whether they're individual funders or family foundations or even, institutional donors or government agencies, that make it really difficult if you're under fiscal sponsorship to get those funds, or they have an outright, blanket policy against giving, donating to, or doing a contract with fiscally sponsored projects. I feel like that's an unenlightened approach, but they have their reasons, and that is certainly an issue that comes up. I think, for some things, fiscal sponsorship is not the right avenue. So if you are thinking about, if you have a large chunk of money coming in as a startup and are going to buy a building and are going to do something related to real estate, you're probably not going to want to go to a fiscal sponsor, because that's a lot of liability, and it's going to be hard to find a fiscal sponsor that's going to want to take you on, quite honestly. So you think about sort of the kind of work you're doing, and there's, other than real estate, there's obviously high risk, high liability things that nonprofits, some can do, some need to do in certain areas, and sometimes those are difficult to find a fiscal sponsor to take on. I would also say personality is an important factor, right? And so if you're starting something and you're the kind of person who doesn't like to play by other people's rules, fiscal sponsorship might not be the thing for you. And you could definitely find fiscal sponsors whose rules are pretty minimal, but they're still going to be there, and they're still going to, that fiscal sponsors, especially ones that are what we would call professional fiscal sponsors, that this is what they do. This is their sort of sole program, is fiscal sponsorship. And there are a fair number of those out there. They're managing a portfolio of 30, 50, 80, 100, 200, 500 projects, and they have to sort of keep everyone in mind, and they can't let sort of individuals kind of go off on tangents and do things that don't, that might impact the rest of the group negatively. And so they have to sort of keep that in mind. And so that, can lead to some chafing among different kinds of folks in different situations. And, I would definitely keep that in mind too.
Yeah, it's a good point that you report to not your board, but the board of that C3. You can have an advisory committee, but
sometimes it's
make
required.
no mistake, the power of the board is to hire and fire the CEO of the company. And you have no sway over that as a fiscal sponsor.
In most good situations, right, the fiscal sponsor is not going to want to get involved in your sort of day-to-day programmatic work. So that if that's happening and you're at a place and that's happening, like, that's definitely not a good situation. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's the organization, the C3 and their board, that are technically, legally, fiduciarily in charge of this whole thing. And so if that's not going to work for you, then this is not the path that you should be going.
Yeah. Even with all that said, I do know that you can obviously receive grants and, application to many organizations, but it may preclude you from some, for sure. Is there like an over under on, like, you mentioned the word $50,000? If I intend to be raising more than $50,000 in year one, should I actually go toward fiscal sponsor or get going with my own nonprofit?
I would say if you can't look at yourself in the mirror and say, we're going to keep this below the level of what the IRS allows for the 1023 EZ form, you should get a fiscal sponsor.
Mm-hmm. And then at what point it was like, you mentioned before, like, I've got like $1 million, say, coming in from a, startup donor funding miracle.
Sure.
Should I go with a fiscal sponsor, or at that point, do I want to really fork over, $100,000 of that?
Yeah, I would say if you've never done it before, if you've never managed a nonprofit before, if you don't really know how that works, and you've gotten someone to hand over $100,000, great on you for that. But I would say if the funder isn't asking for you to get someone who knows what they're doing, you should probably do that on your own and get a fiscal sponsor, because that $100,000 that is going to go to the fiscal sponsor, you're still probably going to be hard pressed to get all of those services for that money.
Yeah. Now, what if it's $1 million instead of 100,000? I don't know why I'm like obsessed with just making the number. What about
if you get $1 million, $100,000 is a lot of money, depending on where you are. I still think it's worth going to a fiscal sponsor, being there for a year or two. Like, there's so much startup when you're a startup. There's so much you have to do to launch the program or whatever the work is that you're doing, that if you could just focus on that, you're going to be so much better off. And then, there's no time limitation where you have to be under fiscal sponsorship for 3 years or 5 years or anything like that. So, after a year or two, maybe you feel like you've got everything going and you're ready, like, then you can leave.
Yeah. Talk to me about how hard is it? Because I see in some of the things I've read about, it can be really difficult to make a transition and complicated to disengage to become my own nonprofit later. Talk to me about what are the steps of moving once I had a fiscal sponsorship for 2 years into becoming my own nonprofit. And what is usually the driver of that decision?
Yeah, so I'll start with the second question first, right? The driver of that, most people think it's money, and most people think it's, now we're at a certain size, we're paying 10%, we have a budget of $1 million. Like, what if we took that $100,000 and did all these other things with it? Which is a fair point, but often the thing that drives projects to leave is something different. Usually it's either the sponsor has made some major mistake, which happens.
Okay.
There's
Human
many
error.
there's many hardworking people in the fiscal sponsorship sector, and they do wonderful jobs, but occasionally everyone makes mistakes. So sometimes there's like a loss of trust between the two parties, and so that's a big sort of fork in the road point. Sometimes they just outgrow what services the sponsor can provide, right? And so if they've, I talk to a lot of fiscally sponsored projects, and I always say if you're starting to hire people to do work that you think your fiscal sponsor is doing or should be doing, then it might be time to consider making the move, right? And so, what that entails is essentially you're starting from scratch like you would have if you got a C3 the first time. So the actual sort of technical process is the same for getting that new legal entity, getting a C3, all of that. You got to go through the IRS, all that fun stuff. And then the hard part is the sort of plane's already built and already flying, and now you got to like move everybody to a different plane in the middle of the air. Right. So to use a bad analogy, you have to either build or outsource all of that infrastructure that your sponsor is providing. And that.
Yeah, because it wasn't built. I mean, it's kind of built into your cost with that 10%, but you don't get.
Right.
There's points at which it doesn't make sense.
Right. Yeah. There's definitely points where the model breaks down for sure.
How long does it take? Like, what is that? How long does that process take to go create your own C3 and moving out of a fiscal sponsorship?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest sort of amount of time is the IRS is literally waiting for them to process your 1023 application.
Yeah.
So I always, when I talk to projects, hopefully I get to them a little bit earlier, and I say, like, start it now, start that process. You don't have to leave. When you get your letter from the IRS, your determination letter that says we've approved you to be a C3, that doesn't mean you have to leave your fiscal sponsor that day or next month or even a year from then. You have a good amount of time, not forever, but you have a good amount of time to then then you control the timetable. And so, from the day you get your letter, assuming you've done some work before that to set things up, it probably takes 3 to 6 months for most folks to move out to their own.
Yeah, and you have that graceful transition afforded by having the cover of a fiscal sponsor.
Yeah, exactly. And most fiscal sponsors, especially ones that are professionalized and do this as their mission, they know this is part of the life cycle, and so they're not they don't do anything to try to keep you or make it difficult. Like a lot of people are afraid of, if I tell my sponsor I'm leaving, they're gonna stop
lock
doing
in.
This. Yeah, no, that's I mean, occasionally it happens with organizations that do fiscal sponsorship as like a one-off, and they didn't do a good job of separating the funds out, and so now all the money's commingled, and there's lots of questions of how much belongs to who and how much you can leave with and all that, and that could get really ugly. But in most of the situations, it's very clean, and everyone is very cordial and civil, and they want fiscal sponsors want you to succeed because that looks good on them too.
Yeah.
Right.
But they're providing you banking services, though. That I feel like I didn't touch on that closely. So let's go back to $100 gets donated through a fiscal sponsor to my organization, Whales of America. And that, now $90 sits in their bank account, and then I can draw on it. I can pay bills from it. Is that the normal relationship? So they're providing that banking service as well.
Yeah, that's correct. So they do provide the banking. Your money is going to their bank account, and it's up to them and their accounting people to cleanly separate what belongs to this project versus what belongs to this project. It's sort of in the accounting world, it's called fund accounting, and it's something that's sort of very basic in nonprofit because a lot of nonprofits have restricted funds, right? Which are, you get money from a donor that's only for a specific project or program. And so that goes in its own account on the in the QuickBooks or whatever, whatever financial accounting software they're using. And it can only be touched for that purpose, right? So fiscal sponsorship from an accounting perspective is basically that. Just everything is restricted that comes in for a project because it's restricted for that project. So within the project, if you led the project, you might say, oh, well, it's unrestricted because we can use it for whatever we want because it came from George's mom. But at the fiscal sponsor level, they're saying, okay, yeah, but it's restricted because it's only allowed to be used by this project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but then you can get an inception situation where it's like restricted within that for only work on Pacific-based whales and not administrative. So
yeah, for sure. And then they can, your mom could say, well, you can only buy,
healthy snacks
for whales with that money in the Pacific.
For whales specifically. Right. Yes. All right. Before we go down that rabbit hole, I want to switch us back to our conversation about, kind of how you got started and maybe move into our rapid fire with some quick responses to some questions that I have for you. So hopefully you're ready. Let's knock these out. What is one tech tool or website that you or your organization has started using in the last year?
The biggest one we started using is called Circle. It's a community platform. So we recently just launched a community for fiscal sponsor staff, and we're using Circle. So far, so good.
What is one tech tool? Cover that one. What is one tech issue? Yeah, you are battling with at present.
For me, it's been the sort of false promise of optimization and automation, I should say, where automation is great. I'm all about optimization, but as soon as you automate things and optimize them, get down the amount of time you're using on them, spending on them, more stuff just fills that space. Unless you're like really good about not doing that. And so that's my main issue at the moment.
Nature abhors a vacuum. It's an immutable truth, Andrew.
I've learned many times.
What is coming in the next year that has you the most excited?
I think building up this community is something that I've been working on for a long time. So I've been co-leading a weekly Zoom for fiscal sponsors that's totally open and free to anyone who works in an organization that provides fiscal sponsorship, no matter where they are, what kind, what it looks like. And we've been doing that with a partner for over 3 years now. And so we started in the pandemic, and we've done over 150 of these. And we've built this kind of community of people that does fiscal sponsorship. And I think the next evolution of that is this online community where they can go, and it's not just about a weekly 10 o'clock Zoom in the morning on Tuesday, but it's about sort of whatever you need, whenever, get your questions answered, commune with folks who do this.
Can you talk about a mistake that you made earlier in your career that shapes the way you do things today?
Yes. So this is actually my second foray into consulting. And my first one, I didn't have a focus. I literally sent an email. The way I got started was I sent an email to everyone in my address book, my Gmail address book, that is, with a graphic that said "Rent my brain." And as you might imagine, not too many people responded. And I learned a really important lesson, which was you can't make the client do any of the work. And so, and having a specialization is a really valuable thing. So the next time around when this presented itself, I picked a niche that didn't really exist before I started doing this, which is consulting to fiscal sponsors and fiscally sponsored projects. And it's been great. It's been wonderful. And so that's the big lesson I've learned.
Yeah, one size fits all actually fits none.
Exactly.
All right. Do you believe nonprofits or a nonprofit can successfully go out of business?
I think what you're asking is, can they do their work so well that the problem that they're trying to solve is solved and they're not needed anymore? Is that what you're kind of getting at? Okay. Then yes.
That is what I'm angling at.
100%. 100%, yes. And many should.
I kind of hold that question out there as like a Rorschach, though. So I like the ambiguity of what we get back. But that is at the core of it.
Yes.
If I were to throw you in the good old hot tub time machine back to when you started in 2015, what advice would you give yourself?
I would say listen more than you talk and give things more time than you think they're going to need.
Yeah, I like to joke that I've made it half as far in twice the amount of time here at Howell.
Exactly.
What what is something you think your organization should stop doing?
Should we stop doing? I mean, for my company, I think we need to stop. I need to stop doing a lot and let the people that I have working with me who are really good and understand do more of it and delegate more and give them a chance to shine more.
If I were to hand you a magic wand to wave across the social impact sector, what would that wand do?
I've been waiting for this one. Um, I would want fiscal sponsorship to become the default for starting something, right? So if you submit an application to your state, start a corporation or a nonprofit, or you submit a thing to the IRS, the first question you get back is, have you tried fiscal sponsorship yet? And if not, why not?
I could second that. I feel like there'd be a lot fewer like dormant nonprofits out there and a lot of time and startup capital that gets just blown away in trying to set up the infrastructure when you're just like, I wanted to see if the idea would work.
Exactly.
Brilliant. I don't know if that's what my wand would do, but I can get behind a wand that does that. All right. How did you get started in the social impact sector?
Yeah, so I started probably in like high school writing letters for Amnesty International, and sort of did nonprofit-y kinds of things like my entire educational life. But then I didn't really get into this work as a job until about 13 or 14 years ago, and I went to work for a tech startup that happened to be also a nonprofit. It was an ed tech startup that was also a nonprofit. And I tell people I went for the technology and I stayed for the nonprofit. And I was hooked from there.
What advice would you give college grads currently looking to enter the social impact sector?
Yeah, I would say when you're thinking about, if you're looking to work for an existing organization, say, which I think is, a, a good way to get some experience to start, you want to think about the cause and obviously have an attachment to the cause that you're going to be focused on. But you also want to think about what is the day-to-day work you're going to be doing, and also what is the culture and what is how does the place that you would be working for operate? Because I think those are things that sometimes people don't think about. They just want to go, save the whales, which is wonderful, but if the boss at the whale organization is not a good one, it's going to color your whole experience.
What advice did your parents give you that you either followed or didn't follow?
My dad always said I would never get a job with a psychology degree from college, so I guess I didn't follow his advice there, and still went with it, and turned out okay. But my parents always said, be kind and treat people with respect, no matter who they are, and I think that's an important thing that sort of everyone can grab onto.
All right, final question. How do people find you? How do people help you?
Yeah, the best place to find me is schulmanconsulting.com. I think the link will be somewhere around here, probably many times on this page. And how can they help me? There's this thing that happens after people talk to me or hear me talk, which is, even if you've never heard of fiscal sponsorship before, you're going to hear about it 3 or 4 times in the next month. It's just going to pop up in your life in ways that you've never imagined. So if there are people that you talk to who have an issue in fiscal sponsorship or are curious to learning more about it, send them my way.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for sharing. I'm totally on board with more people trying a fiscal sponsorship first before the headaches of the 501c3 process. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us and for your work. Take care.
My pleasure. Thanks.